As you may know, I teach theology at Fordham University in New York. I was recently having a conversation with a graduate student. And in the course of the conversation, I parenthetically mentioned a statement by the English novelist Iris Murdoch, who said, "Some Christian teachings have become so celebrated and beautified in great pictures that it almost seems as if the painters were the final authorities on the matter." And this graduate student was struck by that. She says, "Yeah, that's right. But could you be more precise? Could you give some examples of that?" Well, examples of that are easy to find. You know, why do people think that there are 3 magi at the crib? The Gospel of Matthew doesn't give any number to the magi. Why do people think of them as kings? We 3 kings of Orient are. The Gospel of Matthew, they're clearly not kings, they're astrologers. But they've been pictured as kings. People have seen the pictures. And a great deal of the Christian imagination actually comes from the pictures that we've seen, rather than what we've read in the Gospels or heard preached. Or another Easter scene, the disciples coming back from, or going to Emmaus and Jesus appearing to them. Every picture of it that I've ever seen that I can recall shows 2 men. But it would be much more logical from reading the Gospel to think that it was a man and a woman, Thomas and his wife, going back, and that Jesus appears to them in the midst of a family supper. The whole scene of the Pietà doesn't appear anywhere in the Gospels, but it's a very major element in many people's spirituality and in their imaginations of Christianity. And of course, today's Gospel. The classic paintings of the scene of Thomas' encounter with Jesus. You can think of Caravaggio's, maybe the most famous of them, The Incredulity of St. Thomas, or Verrocchio, or Tempruchen, or Signorelli. All of them always show Thomas putting his fingers into the side of Jesus. And if you ask people about this scene in the Gospel, that's what they think. That's what they think happened. But notice that that's not what the Gospel says. On the contrary, Thomas does not touch the resurrected Jesus in response to Jesus' invitation to do so. He believes when he sees. The Institute, Raymond Brown, wrote on this passage, when Jesus appears and somewhat sarcastically offers Thomas a crass demonstration of the miraculous that he had demanded, Thomas comes to believe without probing Jesus' wounds. From the perspective of John's Gospel, that's important. If Thomas had accepted the invitation, he would have shown himself an unbeliever, one of those who are condemned in John's Gospel for demanding signs and wonders before they can believe. So in the Gospel, Thomas believes when he sees. But what does he see? What he sees is an appearance of Christ. He still has to believe that this vision is a reality, or is of a reality. The point is that the apostles who saw the risen Jesus still had to have faith. We're told in Matthew's Gospel that even after these appearances and visions, some still doubted. Seeing is not knowing. And in the matters of faith, seeing is not believing either. The external signs are still signs. What faith is about can be proven empirically or shown physically, because it's about something more than a physical reality. It's about a relationship of trust in God's goodness and triumph over evil and death. Jesus says in this gospel, "Blessed are those who have not seen and have believed." The Gospel of John, as we have it today, has a short epilogue, or a second ending, that was added early on by a second redactor, a second writer. But if we exclude that little epilogue in John's Gospel, these words, "Blessed are those who have seen, who have not seen, but have believed," are not only the last words of Jesus in the Gospel, they're the last words of the Gospel altogether. It's the final statement that the writer of John wanted to leave with us. And that's significant. Blessed are they who have not seen and have believed. Usually, if we look at sayings of Jesus in the Gospel, we have to be very careful to ask ourselves, what was the context? What was the lived situation of the people that these words were addressed to? These words are unusual in that they were meant by the author for us. The addressees of these words are not Jesus' contemporaries, it's us. Blessed are those who have not seen, but have believed. So strangely, it's very clear that the intent of this statement is to indicate the superiority of faith over vision. Not only are we not at a disadvantage in comparison to the apostles, this gospel says we have the advantage over the apostles because we have not seen. Why should that be so? Is it somehow more meritorious to believe blindly? Is it somehow better to believe simply because other people have told us, have testified to this, and we should take their word for it? Is faith ultimately a matter of an irrational act of belief, of submission, or an act of wishful thinking? If not, what can be the basis of belief in the resurrection? It's clear that it does have to do with the testimony of others, with a story that we've received, beginning with the first disciples, and then written down in the Gospels and transmitted to us. But clearly we don't believe simply because of the testimony of those first generations of Christians. How could we possibly take the word of people who lived nearly 2,000 years ago? We confront Lessing's famous problem of the great foul, wide ditch that is history, historical knowledge. Clearly, we believe in that testimony, but not just on its own. Not simply as a testimony from the past, but a testimony that's being lived out in a living tradition of faith. But that's not all. In the first reading, we hear St. Peter saying, "We are witnesses to these things, and so is the Holy Spirit." It's not just human testimony that we're believing in. There's another testimony, the testimony of God, the testimony of the Spirit. That is, that all of these externals, the Gospels themselves, the historical witness, are received by us if there's something interior to us, an experience of God, something that's of its nature invisible, testimony of God in our hearts, a kind of instinct for the supernatural, for the real. And that takes place not in some kind of mystical experience, that takes place in our human experience. The testimony of the Gospels, the testimony of history, is believable insofar as it corresponds with and explains the rest of our experience. It gives us a way of interpreting what's actually going on in our lives in two different ways. On the one hand, the experiences of goodness, beauty, generosity, the fact of having values, seeing people who love in such a way that they actually give their lives, doing that ourselves, having hope even in the face of death. That's the interior experience of the Holy Spirit. And on the other hand, the experience of evil. Experiences that make us revolt against them. Experiences that call out for a reversal. A reversal that's actually impossible within the lifetime of any one of us, or within human history, even though we're always striving toward it. So there is the witness of God as well as the witness of human beings. But to receive that witness, of course, there's a condition. Belief is not forced upon us, as seeing might be forced upon us. Believing without seeing is not just an intellectual act. It has to be a commitment and a way of living so that we have the relevant experience. We're part of the evidence. It's believable if, and this is why Jesus says they are blessed who believe without seeing. It's believable if we're ready, not simply to receive it, to believe it, but also to live it and be it.